Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and the reviews for Awesome Movie are in. And the main criticism, too Jewish.
Yeah, we're screwed if we accidentally travel back in time with this podcast to the era of the Nazis, because we're out of luck there. But
hey, I just want to put this out there. I'm gonna take a stance right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like Nazis, Josh.
Okay, all right.
Fair.
Well, I think this will come up again, perhaps later, or throughout the podcast even.
I hate them.
Okay.
I don't want anything to do with that. I want them to go away forever is what I want.
I'm with you on that, but we're going to have to talk about them a bit here in this episode, because in this season of Awesome Movie Year, we have been talking about the films of 1980, and this is our foreign film episode, and we are going to be discussing Francois Truffaut's film, The Last Metro, which is set during this the Nazi era in 1942, during the occupation of France, and concerns the members of a theater, well, not a theater company, but the people who work at a theater attempting to put on a play under the regime of the Nazis in Paris in 1942.
Yes, Josh, as you know, I refer to it as Le Dernier Metro because I'm a
because
French
you can't because you speak French very poorly is why
Le Dernier Metro.
Le Dernier Metro.
That's what I said.
Close enough.
Theater Montmartre, right?
Montmartre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's stop that, because we're just gonna really brutally ruin this lovely language.
But right off the bat, before you get to the reviews here, Josh, one interesting thing is, like you said, it's when the Nazis occupied France, but they were not, they were still living and able to live with, without constant warfare. So it's an interesting time setting, because you see, these, awful human beings taking over a country, but not in a way where, it's not 3 years from now or 2 years from, it's, do you know what I mean? It's 1942 is different than 1944.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's interesting about this, is that there's this weird dichotomy between people just kind of going about their daily lives. And we learn at the beginning that there's actually this huge demand for theater and for cinema, because people are going into these buildings to use the climate control, the air conditioning and the heating, because there isn't any of that in their homes. But even as people go about their daily lives, they're still living under the constant threat of something worse happening. We see that the Nazis are everywhere. They're out and about anywhere that you go. And if you make one wrong move, it's possible that there could be severe consequences. And of course, we see that because the head of this theater company, Lucas Steiner, who is a German Jew living in France, is hiding in the cellar of the theater itself, because he is afraid of being sent off to a concentration camp. So that's a very, very serious thing, even though sometimes in the movie, the character seems to not take it as seriously as it deserves, which is a frustrating thing for his wife, played by Catherine Deneuve. But there is this weird contrast between those two things.
Yeah, I actually think, and I put it in my Letterboxd review, go for Jason, that was one of the most fascinating elements of this, is that you are dealing with this incredible crisis that we know is going to get worse, and you're living in a country that's been invaded and overtaken. But at the same time, you do have these everyday conversations of, what's right for the play, who's in a romance with whom. It was this mix of, the everyday with this world shattering kind of overtone. And I thought that really worked well in this film.
Yeah, I like that. And it's interesting. We'll get in a moment to the reviews where some critics seem to find that to be a weakness of the film. But I disagree. I'm with you, Jason. I think that what is fascinating about this story is the way that life continues, no matter what. People are still people. And they still have to express themselves artistically, and they still have romantic longings, and they still have little petty disagreements, and everything that human beings express and have in their lives continues on even under this horrible threat of occupation from the Nazis. So I'm with you on that. And this movie was a big success. It's basically Truffaut's kind of last hurrah. It was not his final film, but his final big successful film. It grossed $23.3 million worldwide, including $3 million in the US, which is a pretty impressive number to me for a French film about World War II in 1980. I couldn't find anything on the budget, but I doubt it was a huge budget. So I'm imagining that that's a pretty big success. Also here in the US, it was nominated for the Oscar and the Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film, although it did not win either of those. In France, it was the movie of the year, nominated for 12 César Awards, which is their top film award, and it won 10 of those awards, including Best Film, Best Director for Francois Truffaut, Best Actor for Gerard Depardieu, Best Actress for Catherine Deneuve, Best Cinematography, Editing, Production Design, Sound, Writing, just swept those awards, really. The only two it didn't win were the Supporting Acting Awards for Heinz Bennent, who plays Lucas Steiner, the Jewish playwright who has to hide away, and Andréa Ferréol, who plays the production designer who is a lesbian.
Arlette. Yes, Josh. The foreign film at the Oscars, the winner was Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, and at the Golden Globes was Tess. I've never seen either of those. Have you?
No, I have not. And Tess is a film in English, but I guess the Golden Globes decided that British films were foreign films. So
what's so distinct?
Yeah, exactly.
Josh, one other fun fact. The only other film to win 10 César Awards was Cyrano de Bergerac, starring
Gerard Depardieu.
Yes.
That's that is interesting. And it's interesting too that this was kind of in a way a comeback for Truffaut. Not that he was necessarily struggling. I mean, he was a major world filmmaker, but in terms of having this big mainstream kind of crowd-pleasing hit, it had been a while. The one other background thing that I thought was kind of fascinating is that Heinz Bennent, the German actor who plays Lucas Steiner, is playing this Jew who's hiding from the Nazis. And in real life in World War II, he served in the Luftwaffe. So, yeah.
That's something I'm having difficulty wrapping my mind around, you know? So.
I mean, presumably he was one of many Germans who, you know, they are conscripted, you're drafted, you have no choice but to serve in the military. And hopefully he did not support the Nazi cause. I mean, I have to imagine that by 1980, people would have had to accept that he was not a Nazi in order for him to have a successful career. But I don't know all the details. It's one of those things that's just listed on Wikipedia and with no further follow-up. So maybe there's more to that story. I'm not sure.
Come on, stupid. Be a smarty. Go and join the Nazi party.
All right. I didn't know that the producers was going to come up here.
Referencing one of our former Awesome Movie Year episodes.
Yes, indeed. So critics were mostly into this, although slightly less into it than I kind of expected, given how well it did awards-wise. It got 2 thumbs up from Siskel and Ebert, but they were both kind of mixed on it. And they both felt the way that I was just kind of describing to you, Jason, where they liked the story, the kind of personal story of the theater company, but they felt like the context of the occupation by the Nazis wasn't taken seriously enough. And that was their real main criticism. And I just felt like they're completely off base, because what makes the story interesting is not that it's not taken seriously, but that there's still a whole world going on while this is happening. And you have to live your life, and you have to continue appreciating art and expressing yourself and all that, even when you're under occupation. But both of them felt like Truffaut had been sort of glib about the Nazi occupation.
No, I agree with you. I mean, those two halves made it a whole for me. Also, as you mentioned, the Steiner character stays in a underground, room for 800 days, and they're always plotting his escape. So like how much more seriously do you want them to take this thing?
Right. I don't know if they wanted more like archival footage of concentration camps or gun battles, or I don't know what they would want, but it wasn't, again, it was not an uncommon criticism. So in his written review, Roger Ebert said, most of the movie's events take place within the walls of the theater. This is a backstage film, not a war film. There are moments of great danger, somewhat marred by the fact that Truffaut does not resolve them realistically. And there is an unforgivably sentimental ending that ties up everything without solving anything. The problem, I think, is that Truffaut sees the Nazi presence in Paris simply as a plot device to create tension within his theatrical troupe. It is ever so much more dramatic if the show must go on despite raids, political directives, and an electricity blackout that requires the stagehands to power a generator by bicycle power. It's all too cute. Nobody seems to really understand that there's a war on out there. And yet, within the unfortunate limitations that Truffaut sets for himself, he does deliver an entertaining movie. So he's almost like reluctant to praise this movie, which I feel like he's off base on that.
Now, Gene. No,
that's a terrible impression.
Yeah, I don't know, where did that even go to? So,
yeah.
Pete, who was the center square back in Hollywood Squares?
Paul Lynde.
Paul Lynde, yeah. Now, Gene. So,
yeah.
I just disagree. I don't know, man. Like he did something different. We've seen great movies and not so great movies where it's all about the war and the occupation and everything. And I thought this was, like we've already said, the day-to-day carries this in this extraordinary and awful circumstance, and it all worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, and the implication that Truffaut somehow doesn't understand the implications, like Truffaut literally lived through this when he was a child.
Which Ebert, was in Illinois having his whimsical, girl chasing years at this point in time, probably.
Right, exactly. And Truffaut too, I'm sure, was having whimsical girl chasing years while living with an occupation, and that's kind of the point here. So Ebert off base. Way on the other side, Vincent Canby in the New York Times thought this was an amazingly wonderful movie. He said, Francois Truffaut's The Last Metro is a dazzlingly subversive work. The film has the form of a more or less conventional melodrama about a small Parisian theater company during the Nazi occupation, though the film's methods are so systematically unconventional that it becomes a gently comic, romantic meditation on love, loyalty, heroism, and history. Not since Ernst Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be has there been such a triumphantly unorthodox use of grim material that usually prompts movies of pious, prefabricated responses. So Canby is really with us, I think, on what we're saying about this film, that it's what's great about this movie is that it doesn't do the grim, serious thing that we might expect from a movie about the Nazi occupation.
Yeah. A few years ago, I pitched this idea. This is totally different, but of a similar vein, where I wanted to do, we've seen disaster movies and stuff like that. And I thought, could we do a movie where, not a buddy comedy, but maybe like an ensemble comedy where people have to escape a hurricane, And this was right around the time hurricanes were hitting Houston and stuff like that. And some people thought it was interesting and some people thought it was a horrible idea.
I mean, I think any of that kind of stuff is reasonable and legitimate because, as we keep saying, no matter what terrible things are happening around people, life does go on. At a certain point, even the most horrible danger becomes kind of background noise, and you continue to have to live your life and to have relationships with other people and to try to find moments of happiness and joy.
Right.
So, yeah.
And you want people to have their happiness and to have their entertainment and to not have to focus on the atrocities all around them all the time.
Right. Not all the time. But I also don't think that this movie somehow pretends that those atrocities don't exist or forgets that the Nazis are dangerous, because that's clearly always there in the background.
Have you seen To Be or Not to Be?
I have not, actually. So I can't.
That was my question.
Oh, yeah. But I would like to. I like Lubitsch. So have you seen it?
Nope.
Okay. Well, we can't compare it, but Vincent Canby loves it and obviously compares this favorably. And then so back on the negative, the very negative end of things, Gary Arnold in the Washington Post takes Ebert's criticisms, I think, even further. He says, a gallery of pleasant non-entities, the Steiner troupe is nevertheless meant to evoke patriotic satisfaction, symbolizing the theatrical wing of a spirit of resistance that sustained and ennobled a whole population during the ordeal of the occupation. Glowing with self-congratulation, the characters are given a curtain call that resembles the finale of Star Wars. The only significant difference, of course, is that Truffaut's characters have done nothing to justify smug, heroic rapture. This is a difficult bummer to shrug off. The mind behind The Last Metro seems cheerfully ignorant. You find yourself wondering what it was in Truffaut that ever appealed to you. It seemed to be something genuine, and now it seems lost. And he goes on and on and on in this review, and makes it sound like Truffaut has somehow, just ruined his own artistic legacy by making this movie, which I think is really way too far.
I mean, in general, he seems to be a critic that I am on the other side of the spectrum from, but like this whole idea, like they did nothing, like in a way, like screw you, buddy, even if all they did was perform plays and bring entertainment to people throughout a difficult situation and then continue to do their job well. Isn't that enough?
Right. And I think the point of the movie is that that is enough, even though we do get into Gerard Depardieu's character, Bernard, is working with the resistance and does way more than just put on a play. But yes, the point I think here is that there's value in art and in giving people escape and in making sure that that still goes on. So, and again, here to call Truffaut ignorant somehow when he literally lived through these events himself is almost as offensive as he makes the movie sound.
America.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to say about the background here, Jason?
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing, Josh. We talked about it with Blow Up, how when you have like one amazing set, all the ways you're able to utilize this. And I thought the way he used the theater space was incredible. I love that and the environment. And when researching it, that was an abandoned chocolate factory that they turned into the theater. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. And I think they do find a lot of interesting ways to use that space. And the space can change too, because of course, over the course of the movie, they're putting on the play and they design the set. So pieces of the set start going up and it makes the space into a different physical environment over the course of the movie, and different things can happen there. So that is something impressive as well.
So the title, I mean, obviously we read what we, read, and what we learned was that we know that the people had to catch the last metro home because there was a curfew and there was no real transportation beyond the metros because, as you said, there was economic hardships and a fuel shortage. So all of that kind of plays into it.
Yeah, and they mention, in the opening narration of the movie, they describe the concept behind the title, the idea that everyone has to catch that final train home at the end of the night after their evening out to go to the cinema or to go to the theater. And it doesn't play into the story quite as much as you would think, based on it being the title, but that is what it's about.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
No, I don't necessarily either. Although I saw some criticism somewhere. I can't remember if it was in one of these reviews that complained about that as well. A lot of complaining.
What a bunch of snippy little bitches back in 1980.
Yeah. So I don't think any of us had seen this film before.
I had not. And I honestly, Truffaut was a major obviously I know who he is. And we've talked about him as an actor in Close Encounters, and he acted in some of his own movies, but I had never seen a Truffaut movie. It was a total just blind spot in my film education, Josh. And, I watched this. I watched the 400 Blows. I'm excited to watch more.
Yeah, that's good. Did you like the 400 Blows?
I like the 400 Blows, but I like this more.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting because, of course, the 400 Blows is Truffaut's first film and still probably his most famous and most acclaimed film and one of the building blocks of the whole French New Wave. Right. And I've seen the 400 Blows. It's been a very long time. I remember liking it a lot when I watched it in a class on French cinema in college, but I don't remember a ton about it now. I've seen a few other Truffaut films, including Shoot the Piano Player, and Fahrenheit 451, which I'm sort of surprised, Jason, that you hadn't seen that.
Yeah,
because
his only English language movie.
Yeah, and we watched that in our little film club with Tony Macklin. And it's an interesting, I feel like it's kind of a misfire that maybe he doesn't quite get the gist of Ray Bradbury's novel that he's adapting there. And maybe Truffaut is not the best director for a sci-fi film. I don't know. And I was hoping to watch more Truffaut films to prepare for this. And I ended up just watching one, Stolen Kisses, which is the first feature-length sequel to The 400 Blows. And he made a number of movies over the course of like
4 sequels to it.
Yeah, 25 years or so, following that character, Antoine Doinel, as he grows up. So Stolen Kisses features him as a young man with various odd jobs and little romances and stuff. And it was fun, but I don't think it's necessarily Truffaut's best work. But he's got a lot of notable films, a lot of classic films. And even though I've seen a few, certainly there's more for me to discover too.
There's more for all of us to discover, Josh. David
Indeed.
never seen it either.
No, yeah, first time. Also, another blind spot for me. 400 Blows is next on my list because I do want to get to that soon. But yeah, it was my first time.
Yeah, so we're all Philistines here. So,
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the cultural appreciation that the Nazis did in this film.
Right, yeah, so true. We're worse than Nazis.
On that note, we'll be back.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about our foreign film pick, Francois Truffaut's The Last Metro. And as we just noted, we're all not as familiar with Francois Truffaut's work as perhaps we should be. But Jason, I know for you at least, coming to this as your first Truffaut film, you really liked this one.
Yeah, I really did. And I kind of have gone over the large brushes with it over here, so to speak. I thought the setting, he really uses the set incredibly well. I mean, the guy, like all the French New Wave film directors, really amazing camera work, as we know, and just super smooth to go from the shot designs where you're starting in one place and ending up in another, and just kind of following the story. And like I said, I just was really interested in the idea of oh, here's the theater gossip of the day, and this person's wants to hook up with this person, but meanwhile, you have this horrible Nazi occupation going on. It all just clicked for me. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I think I didn't quite like it as much as you did, but I did like it, and I think it built for me over time the appreciation of the film as I was watching it, that I was maybe not as engaged with it early on. But as the story went on and I got to know the characters, and it does build some amount of tension and suspense, even though this isn't, as Ebert says, it's not really a war movie. There is always that threat. And toward the end of the movie, the threat is a lot more imminent and a lot more serious as Daxia, the Nazi sympathizing French theater critic who is also the head of censorship or whatever, and has the authority to authorize or not authorize whether they can put on a play. He kind of brings the threat closer and closer to this theater as he tries more to assert his authority. He's this kind of petty loser who seems to see the occupation as a chance for him to become a big deal that he's never been. So it builds more. And I felt like the tension really got to me there toward the end, in part because we had gotten to know the characters really well over time and I cared about what would happen to them. So yeah, I enjoyed it as well.
And Josh, some of the inspiration for this, as I'm sure you had read, was Truffaut's uncle and grandfather were part of the French Resistance, and Daxiat was based on a critic, Alain Liberal.
Sure.
And then the other piece was the actor Jean Maurice's autobiography, in which he, I think, punched Alain Liberal in the face at one point in time.
All right, nice. Yes. I never am super excited when the villain of a piece is a critic, especially he's a Nazi critic. But
yeah, well, you are a member of a ramshackle cuckold organization known as the Las Vegas Critic Society. So I understand why you have to defend these horrible, awful Nazi sympathizers
No Nazis in the Las Vegas Film Critics Society. We have
that you know about.
clear policy. Oh, come on, man. All the other members of this group now under suspicion by Jason for being Nazis. No, I mean, obviously, like it's not a real criticism for me. And they make it clear that it's not like every theater critic is a Nazi. It's just this guy who's obviously this very insecure, power hungry guy who seizes on this possibility. And even when they finally do put on the play and they get all their reviews, and of course they focus on his review in part because he has this power to shut them down. And he says all these negative things, which it also seems like is disingenuous because you see him watching the play and he gives them a standing ovation. And it seems like he liked it and or didn't quite pay attention because he showed up late. But then, of course, he gives this terrible review where most of his criticisms are that the play is too Jewish. But they do mention that all the other reviews were positive. But of course, that's not good enough because he has such an amount of influence.
I mean, at the same time, though, we see ovation after ovation with the audience. And it seems like the play, they say it was a hit. So,
right.
Maybe they put a little too much. I mean, I get what the power he wields, but maybe there's a little too much stock put into that.
Right. I mean, and I think that's another thing where it's an interesting mix of the danger of the time and just the theater and what creative artists go through that, yes, they're concerned that he works with the Nazis and might shut them down or put them in danger, but also they want to get good reviews because they're creative people who want to be liked. So I did like that as sort of a contrast there.
I'll tell you one element I really liked, and I thought, man, for 1980, so ahead of the times. Like, the talk about sexuality and like we mentioned, Arlette's a lesbian, and there's a point in there where someone is talking to another crew member, and they're like, "Oh, your husband had an affair or something." She's like, "No, I had the affair," or whatever. And it was like they were really ahead of the times, and the director was gay, and they just never make a big deal. That's Jean-Luc, about any of this. And it's just, we see so many movies where that is, especially of this time, right? Where like, that's the defining characteristic of a character on screen. And this is just like, cool, these are people, let's move on, and I thought that was really handled well.
Yeah, I agree. And it was interesting. I mean, they especially with that Jean-Luc character, the director, or who is sort of standing in for Lucas Steiner as like a ghost director, is gay, and everyone obviously knows it, and it's no big deal. And I mean, there's a scene of him at home when he gets a phone call, and his boyfriend or whoever, they obviously live together, just answers the phone, and he's just there. And I agree with you. I appreciated that was something that all the characters in this theater world were just like, hey, that's how this is. It did seem a little strange to me that as tolerant as those people were, I know that during the Nazi era that being gay was another way to get yourself sent to a concentration camp. So I was a little surprised that he didn't feel more like he was potentially in danger of being rounded up by the Nazis like Lucas Steiner was. So that was never really addressed. And I don't know, maybe that's something that outside of Germany, they weren't as focused on trying to find homosexuals, but that was a little surprising to me.
Yeah, that's a fair critique, Josh. I think that's true. In the reviews you read, two of them like just bashed the ending, and I thought the ending was really powerful.
Yeah, I liked the ending, and there's I mean, to jump way ahead, there's sort of a fake out ending where we think that Catherine Deneuve's character, Mrs. Steiner, Marion, who is an actor and also becomes sort of the de facto head of the theater while her husband is hidden away, and Gerard Depardieu's character, Bernard, they have this unrequited love, and we think that they're being reunited sometime after the war. And he's in the hospital, and because he was a member of the resistance, that maybe he's been injured in some way, and she's declaring her love for him. And then we pull back and we realize this is a play that they're co-starring in after the war, and he's fine, thankfully. And we see Lucas Steiner there in the audience, who maybe has directed this play or whatever, and the crowd just gives him this wonderful ovation. And I don't think, like, yeah, it's a little sentimental, but I don't think it's too sappy or anything like that. I mean, as Jason, as you said, we see how he spends, 800 days or whatever it is hidden away. It's not like he didn't go through a serious ordeal. And there's a satisfaction to seeing him come out on the other side and have this renewed appreciation from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did direct it because they say he wrote it while he was, in captivity underneath there and hiding. And that was another cool element is like this guy is in hiding, right? But he hears the plays going on every night and he's taking notes and giving notes back to Marianne. And I thought that was interesting. Josh, we mentioned some other Truffaut movies, both Jules and Jim and Two English Girls deal with the love triangle, as well as this one. So I think there's got to be some, I haven't read any Truffaut biographies or anything, but there's got to be something from personal experience coming up from this.
Probably so. Yeah, I've seen Jules and Jim, which is great. But I've not seen Two English Girls. And certainly, like the Antoine Doinel movies also deal with a lot of romantic travails, obviously something that was on Truffaut's mind a lot. But the romantic story or the love triangle story here is kind of underplayed. I mean, to the point where that was one maybe criticism for me that also comes up in some reviews that eventually, as Bernard is preparing to leave the theater and he's going to go off to join the resistance and fight against the Nazis, and Marion declares her love for him, and it's almost like out of nowhere. I feel like we didn't really get it. I mean, she says she had to like hide it away, but she hid it away so well that it was never foreshadowed even. So that to me was I could have used a little more understanding of them falling in love.
No, I think it was there, when they go to that club and then he leaves, he brings in a woman, he leaves right away. And then she kind of leaves with another man. And plus, Josh, as an actor who's been in the theater, not to this level, but this is the type of stuff that happens, right? On set, right? Or in rehearsals, like, you have these, they're called showmances, and everything, it feels so real. And then when it's done, it's like, oh, that was a thing. And like, they kind of refer to that at the end in the play within, that Steiner wrote there. So I think that worked for me. What confused me a little was I wasn't very clear until he said it that Gerard Depardieu's character Bernard was in the resistance. That was kind of a murky element to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also on purpose, is that initially we see him being kind of furtive and he's having these mysterious meetings with some other character and they're discussing things that we don't quite know. And I think you're meant at that point to be unsure, or at least this was how I felt. I thought, well, okay, either he's in the resistance or he's a Nazi spy. And I wasn't sure which one it was. And then there's a point where he's like fixing up a record player, an old record player that they have in the theater. And he says, Mrs. Steiner told me I could take this for like a party or something like that. And he hands it off to his mysterious contact. And then a scene or two later, we hear on the radio that there's been a bombing where a record player was rigged to go off and it's killed a German commander. And I think at that point you realize, oh, okay, this is what's going on. He's helping the resistance. Sort of surreptitiously. So I think we're meant to be suspicious of him as a character for a little while until we get that info. So I think that's kind of on purpose.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, we, recently talked about Bob Fosse, and it's interesting if you go back and watch Cabaret and then this kind of with these like nightclub era Nazi occupations before the war went to its height. But I like the nightclub scene a lot here. And that singer sings like I love that song. It's by Mir Bistouchain. That's a song my grandparents used to sing to me. And I thought that was the use of music throughout, not just this movie, but also 400 Blows. And I'm guessing throughout most of his movies. And just great.
Yeah, it is. And that song, I mean, I guess that's not a Nazi song, but it is about like a French and German person kind of falling in love and their miscommunication, trying to express themselves.
I always knew like the Yiddish version of it.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's a Jewish song. I don't know.
Yeah. Or I know I know the English words, but I think my grandparents knew it from the Yiddish version.
Okay, I don't know, because my impression, and maybe this is from having seen Cabaret, was that the nightclub was sort of a Nazi playground in a way, and even at one point when Marion says we're all going to the nightclubs, I think it's Lucas who says he's heard on the BBC that like people will be judged after the war for cavorting with Nazis in these nightclubs. And so that's very much what's going on in Cabaret. So that was why I think I saw the song as some sort of expression of like French and Nazi, friendship or whatever, and the way the singer sings it in French and then sings a bit in German. But maybe I misunderstood that.
Dave, you want to jump in?
Dave, the expert on Nazi era nightclubs.
Yeah, some of my favorite stuff for sure. Yeah, no, I don't know. I was just gonna go back to the thing about the romance. I watched this movie. I had to pause it at one point for whatever reason and come back to it the next day to finish it. And I was like, at that point, I was like, I don't really know where this is going. So I looked up just the plot synopsis, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a romance here. Like it was so underplayed to the point where I was just like, I didn't even know that was a thing that was going to be happening here.
Yeah, it is underplayed. I think I fall somewhere in the middle of you two. Like by the time it was revealed, I was like, okay, but it felt a bit too underplayed to me leading up to that.
So by mere Shane, I just Wikipedia'd it. It was a Yiddish song, a Yiddish original. Then there was an English version, and it became a global smash. And then, like Josh, like you said, there was a Nazi version of this too, which is strange because it was a Yiddish song, at first,
right?
Then also the Soviet Union, a Russian version. So it's the song has had a life.
Yeah. So it's like the Nazis have kind of appropriated this piece of Jewish culture and turned it into something to celebrate them, which in itself is interesting and goes with the themes of the movie, because of course the theater world is considered so Jewish, and the Nazis want to appropriate that as well.
Right, because they are cultural lovers, right?
Right. Yes, that's what we're told at one point, that the Nazis, I think Doxia says how the Nazis love culture, but only, the kind of culture that they're going to approve of. It's not really culture, it's propaganda.
You stink, you Nazis.
One thing I liked and I found amusing about this, and maybe this isn't on purpose, but the play that they put on, which is said to be, I think, like a Norwegian play that Lucas Steiner has translated into French, is terrible. Like, and we get the snippets of it, and it's this like ridiculous melodrama, and there's like hidden murders and the love story. And I just thought it was kind of funny that every moment that we see parts of the play, you're like, this is absurd, this play. But I don't know, maybe we're not meant to find it as quite as ridiculous. I think one review did mention something like that and compared it to the movie that the characters are making in Day for Night, which is one of Truffaut's most famous films that I don't think any of us have seen, but that I think in there, the fake movie that they're making also seems like it's terrible.
Day for Night won Best Foreign Picture, and Truffaut was working on kind of a trilogy of entertainment movies, with that as the film movie, this as the theater movie, and then he was working on one as a music hall movie, but he wasn't able to make that because he had to commit to more commercial stuff, and then he died before he had the chance to do that. So
yeah,
so that was called and I get to do my French again.
Oh no,
Agent Magique, the magical agency.
All right.
So
a couple other like set pieces I wanted to mention in this film. Like I was saying, I felt like the tension and the suspense kind of built. And there's a moment where Bernard, Gerard Depardieu's character, is going to meet his contact in a church, and his contact kind of waves him off and then is arrested by the Gestapo. And that I thought was really done well, all with like no dialogue. And he goes into this church, and there's a children's choir singing some sort of, it sounds like maybe a patriotic song, but maybe also like a song that Nazis have made them sing.
Forced them to sing.
Yeah. And that's the whole backdrop as Bernard kind of fidgets there in the church and is wondering where his contact is. And it's all staged really, really well, I thought, and gets across exactly what's going on without the characters ever speaking. So I liked that a lot.
One thing that was mentioned in one of the reviews that I really liked was all the problems that the theater ran into that Raymond had to solve, the kind of stage manager where, they're using bicycles to power it, or using kind of floodlights to light the stage. I thought all that worked well as well. Yeah,
I mean, and it again, it shows this dedication that even under these circumstances, they're doing everything they can to keep things going. And they mention, there's all these blackouts and other theater companies have to close, but because they come up with this system where they use automobile headlights that they can power by the bicycles, that they can keep it going, keep the lights on so that they can have their show. So all of that shows that ingenuity. And within the theater, toward the end, when the Gestapo show up and they want to investigate the cellar where Lucas Steiner is hidden, and they're putting on the play, and during the play, they have to kind of maneuver themselves. They have to keep acting, but also Marion and Bernard talking to each other to make sure that they can, not let Lucas be discovered. And I thought that was really suspenseful and uses something, Jason, that you're mentioning, that the space there, the theater itself, and the different set elements, as they're kind of moving around, or they're Raymond, the stage manager, is making sure that the Nazis are only, in certain places so that they don't discover what's going on. I thought that was really effective too.
Yeah, I mean, you and I like this. Dave did not. Should we rate this thing, Josh?
Yeah, I don't know. Should we rate
5 record bombs?
5 record bombs. Let's do it.
I gave it 4. I really like this, and I'm glad. In a way, I'm glad this was the first Truffaut movie I saw because look, obviously I was going to get to him at some point, but this really made me excited, and I'm excited to watch more.
Yeah, I too, have seen a few more than you have, but had at least a few on my list that I was going to try to see before we talked about that I didn't get to. And I definitely want to, including Day for Night, which is probably the most famous Truffaut I haven't seen. So I'm going to give this a 3.5 record bombs. I didn't like it quite as much as you did, but I did enjoy it. And like I said, I kind of enjoyed it more as it went along, to the point where by the end it was like, oh, that was really good. So Dave, however, did not appreciate the genius of French cinema.
Yeah, apparently not. And I just want to say, like, I really like the performances here, and there are things about the movie that I did enjoy, but while rating it, I was like, is this even a 3-star for me personally? No, not really. So I'm going 2.5 record bombs.
All right. Well,
Dave, you hate Jews.
Maybe maybe if you see some other Truffaut films, Dave, you'll appreciate them more.
I think I will, probably.
Yeah.
By the way, Dave is Jewish, in case you don't know.
Yes. We'll come back in a
moment. They'd catch me very quick.
Yeah. We'll have to hide Dave in a cellar.
Uh-huh.
All right. We'll come
back.
Have
to hide all of us in a cellar, Josh.
Yeah, probably so. Okay. We'll come back.
We'll be back after this and talk about the legacy of The Last Metro.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about Francois Truffaut's film, The Last Metro. And legacy-wise, we've talked a bit about Truffaut's career. This was toward the end of his career. This is the third to last movie he made. As I was saying earlier, basically the last major hit in terms of critical acclaim and commercial success. He made 2 more movies after this, which I'm not familiar with at all. The Woman Next Door and Confidentially Yours. And as Jason was saying earlier, also, he had a lot of different projects that he was planning or hoping to get to, but he died pretty young at age 52 in 1984. So he was not able to do that. And this is kind of stands as one of the last bits of his legacy, but a strong way to sort of go out on.
Yeah, and Josh, we obviously talked about him as an actor in Close Encounters, but he starred in a good amount of his own movies. Have you ever seen him in any of his own movies?
I don't think so. I'd have to look again at the full list of what he's been in, but I'm pretty sure the stuff that I've seen he's not starring in. And of course, the Antoine Doinel films starting with the 400 Blows are very autobiographical, but that's not him. That's Jean-Pierre Léaud, who is the actor who plays Antoine throughout all of those movies over the course of decades, and is in a bunch of other Truffaut films as well. So I haven't seen him act, really.
And of course, my relationship with Truffaut goes back to the days when we both wrote for the Cahiers du Cinéma, André Bazin's, thought-provoking, critical publication of cinema, where Truffaut wrote a certain trend in French cinema, which was him taking French cinema to task and like kind of jump-starting this French new wave, And from there, he wrote for Arts, Letters, Spectacles. And so he was a very noted journalist and critic before he jumped in with the 400 blows there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those French New Wave figures started out as critics in Cahiers du Cinéma, including Jean-Luc Godard, who, of course, we talked about in our 1967 season when we talked about Weekend, his film. And they were friends and worked together early on. And it's interesting to me to see the contrast between them because Truffaut, while still making these very autobiographical personal films, really had a far more mainstream career after becoming internationally known in the early days of the French New Wave. And as we talked about with Godard, he took all of that renown of his early career and used it to make a lot of really, really challenging, let's say, art films that appeal to an increasingly small niche audience. And he is a big curmudgeon and wasn't like Godard would never want to work with Steven Spielberg or things like that. So they really diverged in their interests as time went on.
Right. I had read that Truffaut, the auteur theory, came from him. So it's interesting, like you said, because they are both auteurs. And as you know, have you ever read Truffaut Hitchcock, the interview book with
No, I have not.
Yeah. So you could do that, Josh.
I could, yes, read a lot of stuff. But right, it seems like Truffaut is more inclined to actually maybe follow in those footsteps of Hitchcock versus Godard going in this increasingly esoteric direction. And of course, Godard is still alive and still making films in his 90s. And, you know, Truffaut, who knows where he would have gone had he lived.
He would have directed Captain Marvel 3.
Sadly, that's not entirely off base. So maybe it's better that we didn't find that out. But no, I did want to say that one of the other things that really appealed to me about this film is that it is so obviously shot on sound stages. And it has this kind of old fashioned, like it looks in a lot of ways like a film from the 1940s.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more color. Obviously, the colors are beautiful in this film and really pop. And, you know, some of the mature subject matter, especially about sexuality. But in a lot of ways, it feels like a movie that could have been made in the time that it takes place.
Yeah, I love the look of this movie.
Yes.
So, Josh, we talked about Catherine Deneuve when we did Belle de Jour, one of the most highly acclaimed and highly successful actors ever in French cinema. And
yeah.
Along with that, Gerard Depardieu is the number 2 grossing actor in French cinema of all time. And again, tons of awards. And, you know, we're here to talk about him as an actor. There's a lot of personal stuff that not so good. But you know, we're talking about him as an actor right now.
Interesting that he's in this movie about resisting authoritarian rule, and he is a good friend of Vladimir Putin in real life.
Oh, I wasn't even going to there. I was going with all the sexual misconduct allegations.
All of that stuff. So much going on. And yet he still works steadily. He's incredibly prolific, including credits, you know, up to very recently. And both Deneuve and Depardieu, in addition to being 2 of the biggest stars in French cinema history, both also big international stars working in lots of English language films. I think I probably ran through these same few Catherine Deneuve performances in more recent films that I like, Dancer in the Dark and Persepolis, a film that we also have talked about in our, I think it was 2007 season, the animated film. And just a couple years ago, a film called The Truth from Hirokazu Koreeda, which was his film that he made in France. And she was nominated for an Oscar for Indochine in 1993, which I have not seen.
Gerard Depardieu was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Green Card, the Peter Weir movie.
That's an interesting... he was also nominated for an Oscar for Cyrano de Bergerac, which I have seen and is quite good. It was one of his big breakout roles in the U.S.
And before that, I think Jean de Florette was like the one that kind of, I mean, I'm sure Las Metro as well was, you know, but Jean de Florette was a huge film in the mid 80s.
Yeah. And I remember, I feel like Gerard Depardieu was a staple of my high school French class because I remember watching, I'm pretty sure we watched Cyrano de Bergerac, we watched Jean de Florette, and The Return of Martin Guerre, which is another major like French film that was a big international hit. So I saw a lot of Gerard Depardieu in French class.
And in my college class, we watched My Father the Hero. Oh no!
Wait, did you really? Was that?
No,
okay.
No. It's a ridiculous comedy, you know that.
Yeah, so and he's in 2. He was in it was a French comedy that was remade in the US, and he's in both versions of it. The U.S. version, I think, with Katherine Heigl as his daughter.
When she was still around the time of Jurassic Park. But he was also in Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, Ang Lee's Life of Pi, as we said, a very revered and celebrated actor.
Yes.
And I don't want to say anything beyond
maybe not a great guy.
We've said that. I mean,
Yes.
it's we keep coming back to these subjects where it's like, hey, we have to focus on what they're doing on screen, and we're obviously not condoning their off screen.
No, but it is interesting to me that he doesn't seem to have trouble getting work these days, despite all of that. But he was a big deal. Also, in that Siskel and Ebert segment, they mention like, and a big, new breakout star from France, Gerard Depardieu, is in this film. So, he was getting that international acclaim there.
Jean Perrault, who played Jean-Luc, wrote Le Cage aux Folles and starred in it both on stage and screen. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, playwright as well. That, of course, adapted into The Birdcage in the U.S. I didn't look up every actor here. Andréa Ferréol, who plays the stage or the production designer, who's a lesbian. She's still alive. She's still working pretty steadily in France. Never became an international star, but lots of French films and television shows.
I think they all are pretty much. They either all work very consistently or are still working very consistently.
Right. Yeah. Not a lot of these actors no longer around, but certainly the ones that are. One thing I thought of, Dave, to talk about a puzzle piece, maybe if you had ever done an episode on Inglourious Bastards, this seems like something that would have been a big influence. I'm sure Tarantino saw this film.
I thought of Inglourious Bastards, also Belfast.
Yeah. That definitely could be. Anything else about the legacy you want to mention here, Jason?
No, it's worth seeking out this film. I think even Dave would say that.
I would, definitely.
Oh, thanks, Dave. So check it out if you have a Criterion Collection. It's also on HBO Max. And I feel like this is not, even though it was a big success at the time, maybe it's not one of Truffaut's best known films these days, but especially if you've seen the big Truffaut movies, give this one a shot as well. So that is The Last Metro, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media.
We are on social media. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or J Harris Comedy, on all the socials. My website, Go for Jason. Listen, guys, it's just not good. As opposed to awesomemovieyear.com, that's fine. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, and Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
My website, joshbellhateseverything.com. Not much better, really, but I might have written something about Truffaut there one time or another. Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And don't forget about our Produced by David Rosen Patreon with bonus content from Awesome Movie Year, of course, as well as advanced episodes of Piecing It Together and stuff from my music career.
Yeah, we still have a bonus episode there on American Pie. Clearly heavily influenced by Truffaut, that film.
Definitely.
So what's coming up in our next episode, Jason?
Josh, it's my pick. And guess
what's your pick?
Well, Josh, next episode, we will be on a mission from God. We're watching the Blues Brothers.
And I've never seen the Blues Brothers, so that is something I'm looking forward to. Tune in next time for the Blues Brothers, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.